I'm going to call this part 6A of the Avante 2011 build series. This is just a brief follow-up from part 6 where I built the shocks, and now I have the shocks complete and mounted on the chassis. So I had mentioned in the manual that installing the rear shocks is a bit of a pain because you have to put in this little shaft here and then put an E-clip on the end to mount the bottom piece of the shock. So I had done that initially and then realized I needed to change something. Taking that E-clip out is really hard. So all I did was went back to this RC screws kit. There's still plenty of screws left over. I just found a screw that's long enough, I think it's a 15mm screw, and then a lock nut, and boom, that was it. That was more than enough to solve that problem. So now it's very easy to take off the bottom of the shock here from the suspension arm. What I had to change was the number of spacers that I put in the bottom of the shock. So I mentioned in part 6 that I needed a total of 10mm of spacing here to limit the suspension travel so that the rear chassis doesn't bottom out. But when I did that and put the chassis on the ground to try to test it out, I didn't get enough suspension travel, and the bottom of the lower deck was still plenty high enough off the ground with all of those limiters. So I took 2 out of the 3 O-rings out of the top. So now what I have is just a 5mm plastic spacer and 1 O-ring, and that appears to be enough to get enough suspension travel while also, preventing the chassis from bottoming out. And so what I'd like to show you now is comparing the Black Special to the 2011. Okay, here I just mounted my Cyber 10B wheels just so I could have something to test this out with here. Okay, same exact suspension. The only difference between the front and rear shocks is the shock piston. So same exact shock oil, same springs, same shock location, everything. Just the Black Special, I built it to the instruction specifications with the 3-hole shock pistons. And on the 2011, I put the 1-hole shock pistons in. Okay, otherwise exactly the same. And for the rear, the number of shock collars I have in there, exactly the same as in the 2011. Okay, so on the Black Special, you'll notice it's a bit oversprung and underdamped. Okay, and on the 2011, it's I can't videotape the feel of it, but it does feel a little bit firmer. And all that really means is that the damping, the compression damping, and the springs are more closely matched to each other. So the 1-hole piston in the front seems to work really well, giving you a smoother suspension feel. It doesn't rebound so sharply as it does in the Black Special. Okay, now going to the rear. Again, the rear, even just with the stock setup, all I did was add here these couple shock collars. It's still oversprung. It feels very light. Okay, single hole piston, 3-hole piston, single hole piston. It just feels a little softer. It feels like the rear, when you land, it will just stay planted. It's not going to bounce back or anything. And just for comparison, now that we're having a 4-wheel drive buggy party out here, I'll just take out my B44. Okay. So this actually, I still have the battery in here, so it's a little heavier. It's weighed down a bit more. But the front of this B44, stock springs, I think the collar position is not entirely stock, but I think 35 weight oil on the front. This feels much more like the front of my Avante 2011 setup. Not exactly the same, but it doesn't feel so, oversprung or anything as it does on the stock Avante setup. And in the rear, it's, reasonably soft, but good damping. Not underdamped like this. This feels appropriately damped. So I'm not saying that this is set up like a B44, but it just feels a bit more like a modern 4-wheel drive suspension should feel. And I'm just using my B44 as a reference here. So the one-hole pistons do make a big difference here. I would definitely recommend trying those out if you're building an Avante 2011 or an Avante 2011 Black Special. So I just want to point that out. I will put on the cam lock wheels and everything, and get the driver figure, paint the body, all that stuff. It'll be a while before I make that video, though. So that's it for now.